I like to make the distinction between parental alienation on the one hand, which is a set of strategies that a parent uses to try to turn the child against the other parent. Parental alienation syndrome is the resulting response in the child. And it's important to make this distinction because not every child who's exposed to parental alienation strategies does succumb to the pressure and does reject that other parent. So we need to have a language for talking about the effort on the one hand of the parent who's trying to turn the child against the other parent, and then the child's response when that child comes to believe that that other parent is completely unworthy of having a relationship with. Boy, I'm having a hard time with this. Okay. I also, these are the terms that I use. The alienating parent is the parent who's exhibiting parental alienation. They get the ing, alienating. They're the active parents. They're doing something. The other parent I call the targeted parent. I don't refer to them as the rejected parent because I am in some respects an optimist. I want to talk about this before that parent is rejected. They're the targeted parent. Before it's too late, before that kid totally rejects that parent, we still need language for talking about who that parent is. And I think of them as the targeted parent because I think of that alienating parent sort of with a rifle and they're looking through the crosshairs and they're targeting that parent. It's a very active thing that that alienating parent is doing. So those are my definitions, all right? I want to give you a deep clinical picture of the 8 behavioral manifestations of the parental alienation syndrome as defined originally by Richard Gardner. He's the genius, in my opinion, who saw kids who were rejecting or having negative feelings towards one parent and identified 8 behaviors that seem to go together. That's what a syndrome is. It's 8. In this case, it's 8, but a syndrome is a collection of symptoms with a common etiology or common cause. He's the one that identified these are the 8 things that when they go together, it's most likely the child is rejecting a parent due to parental alienation as opposed to rejecting a parent for other reasons. So we need to know, what does an alienated child look like? Because from a clinical point of view or from a judge's point of view, you might have a child in your office saying, I hate, let's say it's mom. I hate mom. I want nothing to do with her. How do you know whether that child is rejecting mom, in this case, because the other parent is engineering that rejection, or because mom's a crummy mom and this kid just doesn't want anything to do with her? So we need to know, what are the 8 behavioral manifestations of PAS? Okay, so I'm going to go through this, and I want to give you, like I said, a pretty deep clinical picture. I'm not just going to run through the 8. I'm going to give you lots of examples, so when you're done, you're going to know, that's what an alienated child looks like. And the point of this is ultimately to come to a place where we could make a differential diagnosis. We have a kid who doesn't want anything to do with the parent, and we can say, this is because of PAS, or this is for some other reason, because not every child who rejects a parent is rejecting a parent due to parental alienation. The quotes and the vignettes and the stories I'm going to give you that go along with these 8 behavioral manifestations come from my research with targeted parents, where I got them to tell me vignettes and stories about their relationship with their child and their child's behavior. Okay, so the first behavioral manifestation is the campaign of denigration, and I just sort of boiled that down to everything mom does is stupid and I never loved her. And I want you to notice that I'm going to go back and forth between referring to the alienating parent and the targeted parent. Sometimes it's mom and dad, and sometimes it's dad and mom. In other words, in my research, I certainly found that mothers can be alienating parents and dads can be targeted parents, and the reverse is also true. Dads can be alienating parents and moms can be targeted parents. Okay, so what is this campaign of denigration? Well, the child becomes obsessed with hatred of the targeted parent. So it's not just, I don't really feel close to that parent anymore. Parents who were once loved and valued seemingly overnight become hated and feared. This often happens so quickly that the targeted parent cannot believe what happened to their child. Their loving child turns into this hateful, spiteful person who refuses to so much as share a meal. It is a total blanket condemnation of that parent. And as you notice in my quote there, I never loved her. So they wipe out the entire history of that relationship to such an extent that if you showed an alienated child a photograph of them with the supposed hated parent, with that targeted parent, and you could show them a video or a photograph with that child snuggling with that parent, playing on the beach, snuggling, watching a movie, having a good time, going to Disney World, whatever, you show them that picture, you say, well, you're telling me you never had a good time, you never felt close, but look, you look sort of close in that picture, or you're smiling, it looks like you're having fun. And what does that child say? I was just pretending. I wasn't really having fun. Dad said he would spank me if I didn't smile. So they just completely rewrite history. They can't admit that they ever had any good feelings for that parent. And of course, it's important to note that if there's a legitimate reason for the child's rejection of the targeted parent, like abuse or neglect, then the child's fear and hostility is legitimate, and it's not parental alienation. And this is, I'm going to sort of bring this up a few times because this is where Richard Gardner sort of gets into hot water because people misunderstand and think that he's saying if a child rejects an abusive parent, that's parental alienation. And he never said that, and he's very clear, if there's bona fide abuse or neglect, it can't be parental alienation. All right? So I surveyed some targeted parents, and I said, tell me about this campaign of denigration. Give me an example from your life. And one mother wrote to me, I ran for the local school board, and my son wrote a letter to my opponent telling him what a bad person I was. I mean, can you imagine a child actually caring that their parent's running for the school board and then taking the effort to find out who the opponent is and then bothering to write a letter? I mean, it's like so far above and beyond normal child behavior, right? Another mother wrote to me, quote, my daughter said, whatever it takes, I'm going to destroy you so I can live with Dad. All right, so this is like in a very over-the-top kind of attitude that the child has. Here's another mother wrote to me, they tell me that I'm stupid, that I'm a liar, and that I've put their father in jail or will put him in jail. And I love that quote because there's no allegiance to reality, right? It's like, well, maybe you're thinking you're going to do something bad, so I hate you and you're out of my life forever, right? The mother in this case didn't even do it, and the kids are already mad at her thinking she might do it. So these and many similar statements portray children who are verbally abusive, entitled, angry, and hostilely rejecting toward the targeted parent. All right, and that's just the first manifestation. Okay, so here's just a letter just to sort of hammer it home. This is an 8-year-old girl who wouldn't go into the therapy room with her dad, and the therapist said, well, tell me why. Why won't you even step into the room with your father? And she wrote, 1, I hate Kevin. 2, I hate Kevin. 3, I hate Kevin. 4, I hate Kevin. So it's just this absolute, utter hatred towards this parent. And you notice she doesn't call him Dad, right? Okay, so the second manifestation is weak, frivolous, and absurd reasons for the campaign. And you could sort of sum that up as, Dad slurps his soup and made us go to Disney World. What a terrible dad, right? So these kids, when you ask them, you know, you used to live with Dad and you used to spend X amount of time with him. Now you won't even have dinner with him once a week. Or you won't even see your mother once a month, or Mother's Day. You won't even go out for lunch. Why? And the answers they give are weak, frivolous, and absurd. They're not the kind of explanations that make sense for why a child would want nothing to do with that parent. Okay, so here are some quotes from parents. This parent wrote to me, I think this is a mom. He said that he doesn't like the orange stripes in my hair, and the way I dress is embarrassing. He couldn't believe I wore cowboy boots with my skirt to pick him up from school. I mean, again, can you imagine a child actually caring that the mother's wearing cowboy boots? I mean, it's like so patently absurd. Okay, here's a dad. I said, tell me about the reasons. Why does your son say he won't see you anymore? Quote, you make me eat bad food and you never put me down for my nap on the couch. I say we call DIFUS right away on that one, right? So again, this is just not the level of explanation that makes sense. All right. Manifestation 3, lack of ambivalence about the alienating parent. Now, it's a truism of development that kids have ambivalence, mixed feelings, about everybody in their life, including their parents. Even the best parent in the universe disappoints or frustrates their child, because children are incredibly unreasonable, right? You can't possibly satisfy every desire of your child. So even the best parent is going to annoy or frustrate or disappoint their child. So it's normal for children, even with parents that they love and adore, to be angry at them, to be frustrated with them, to be hurt, all right? But if you talk to an alienated child, they talk about the alienating parent as if that parent is absolutely perfect and above reproach. It's an abnormal lack of ambivalence. And the example I have here is a real-life example. I love my father to death. It's not normal, right? That's just not how kids normally feel about their parents, even really good parents. And if you ask an alienated child, tell me one bad thing about Dad, in this case, one thing. He must do something you don't like, one little smidge of a thing. And they're like, nope, can't think of anything. And then the reverse is true. If one parent is all good, the other one is all bad. So nothing good. They can't think of anything good about that other parent. Nothing. They're a bad cook, they're a bad house cleaner, they're bad this, they're bad that, they're bad at everything. So that's manifestation 3. I'm going to skip the quotes because we started a little late and I don't want to belabor that. Okay, manifestation 4, the independent thinker phenomenon. And notice this is in quotes, big quotation marks, all right? This is where the child will profess and go overboard to make the point that they are not being influenced by the other parent. So these kids will say, Mom, Dad had nothing to do with this, but I don't want to see you anymore. So they know in advance that you're going to say that the other parent had something to do with it. And these kids often use the phrase free will. I have free will. Right? This is all my thinking, when clearly it looks like it's coming from somewhere else. Okay, so I'm just going to give you one example. This is a quote. My daughter will frequently say things that she tells me are her idea, and she will say she has free will. She tells me that when she doesn't call me, that it's her fault and not her father's. So again, they're just sort of going out of their way. And I'm not going to read this letter at length, but I asked a parent to send me an example of the independent thinker phenomenon. And here it is. There's the phrase free will in there. This is an 8-year-old girl saying, I have free will. I'm writing this letter on my own. You're ruining my life because you won't let me travel to Europe. Okay, so it's... All right. Let's go to the next one. Manifestation 5, absence of guilt about the treatment of the targeted parent. So if there are any targeted parents out here, you know that the alienating parent basically gives the child permission to break your heart and to treat you very badly. These kids treat the targeted parent cruelly, harshly, with no love and affection and no good feeling. And these kids appear, and I say appear because in my research with the adults who lived through this long enough to talk about it and tell me they did suffer guilt later when they realized what they had done. But as children, they appear to have no guilt. They will say, oh, well, I took that $200 gift from Mom, but I didn't have to say thank you. She only did it to look good for the judge. So they just find ways of not really acknowledging the humanity, the normal human courtesy that you would want to give another person, let alone your parent. All right, that's a hallmark of alienated kids. Manifestation 6, reflexive support, automatic support. So, you know, even when there's a court order and the divorce is signed, sealed, and delivered, there's about a million ways that alienating parents and targeted parents can disagree and argue over things, right? There's all this gray area in court orders. There's all this wiggle room. There's just lots of opportunity still to have disagreements. And in every case, the child will side with the alienating parent. no matter how absurd that parent's claim is. The child will automatically, reflexively support that parent. And the example that I give is, I've just heard over and over again, the kids will go spend time with the alienating parent and come back to the targeted parent and say, you stole my college money. I've heard like 3-year-olds saying that. They don't even know what college is or money is. And they're like, how dare you steal my college money? And I'll say to the targeted parents, because usually at this point in the talk, some of them are nodding their heads, yeah, gee, that happened to me. And I say, so what do? You go upstairs and you get the bank statement, right? And the targeted parents are nodding their head, yeah, of course, if I'm accused of stealing my kid's money, I want to show them I didn't steal it. And I say, and so let me guess, you took the paper out and you waved it in front of your kid, and did they look at it or did their eyes sort of glaze over? Right. They don't want to see the documentation that that they're wrong. They're like completely wed to this idea that everything the alienating parent says is right and everything the targeted parent says is wrong, no matter how patently absurd the alienating parent is. Okay. Manifestation 7, presence of borrowed scenarios. So alienated children often make accusations toward the targeted parent that utilize phrases and ideas adopted wholesale from the alienating parent. And one clue that a scenario is borrowed is the child's use of language and ideas that he or she clearly doesn't understand. And Gardner gives the classic example of the child saying, Daddy touched my vagina. I don't know what that is, but I know it's bad. And I can tell you from my own research, one of the people that I interviewed had a phone. The mom dialed the phone and put it up to the kid, and he just repeated. The mother was whispering in his ears, and he said, I never want to see my father again. He's a womanizer. He was 9. I said, did you know what womanizer was? He said, no. He had no idea. So, and another person I interviewed, the mom literally wrote out a script for her, like a little play, a little monologue. And when the dad would come to visit, because the mom didn't let the dad take the child out of the house, so all contact had to be under her eye. And before the visit, the mom would rehearse with the daughter the little play, and then the dad would come visit, and the girl would read the script with all these borrowed scenarios in it, and it always ended with, you're a horrible father and I hate you, and then she'd run out of the room screaming and crying. And of course the dad didn't know. To him, his kid was upset with him. But in fact, she was just going through these, this borrowed scenario, this script. And this is what gives alienated kids the feeling of being brainwashed or programmed. And that's why, they have this sort of like automaton quality where they're just repeating, what they're supposed to be saying. Okay. And the final manifestation is rejection of the targeted parent extends to his or her entire friends and family. It's like they have cooties or something, right? So formerly beloved aunts and uncles and grandparents and cousins, people that this child had a loving, close relationship with for years, are all of a sudden, cut off. That's it. They're out. And these kids will miss once-in-a-lifetime anniversaries, weddings, funerals. They, cold-heartedly, completely cut off that side of the family. And that's, the tribal warfare aspect of this, where it's like the families are seen as 2 warring camps, and the kid won't have anything to do with that other camp. Okay, so those are the 8 behavioral manifestations as identified by Richard Gardner and supported in some of my research. And so I just want to go back to that concept of the differential diagnosis. I'm going to go to the next one. Okay, so one way to think about this is, well, how do we know if a kid who's exhibiting rejection of a parent isn't just rejecting that parent because that parent's abusive, right? We need to know this from a clinical point of view. Judges need to know. They don't want to send a kid to an abusive parent, right? They see a kid who says, I hate that parent and I never want to see that parent again. Well, how do we know that we should protect the child from that parent, or we should work towards a reconciliation? Well, the truth is, I think people make this more complicated than it needs to be, because kids who have been abused by a parent do not exhibit those 8 behavioral manifestations. They do not reject the abusive parent. Kids who have been burned, beaten, molested, the worst things a parent can do to a child, those kids want one thing. They want to go back to that parent. It was mommy's fault. No, they say, it wasn't mommy's fault. I was bad. That's why mommy hit me. Right? That's the classic abuse scenario of a child who's been abused. They don't say, I never want to see that abusive parent again. That's just not how abused kids behave. They blame themselves. And they do not proudly and widely discuss the abuse. Think back to that kid who wrote the letter to the mom's opponent running for the school board. Kids who have been abused do not do that. It's like a breakthrough, a miracle when you're doing therapy with an abused kid, when you finally can get them to admit the details of the abuse. All right, they don't, take out newspaper ads and, announce it to everybody, my parent's a horrible parent, all right? And they don't lack ambivalence. Kids who have been abused will say, well, mommy loses her temper sometimes, or daddy loses his temper and daddy might drink, but he's really good at this and he's really good at that and he really tries hard. They don't have that absolute black and white. Even if they see the abuse and even if they're willing to admit it, they don't wipe out everything good about that parent. And they don't worship the other parent. All right? And they don't reject the extended family of the abusive parent. The primary foster care mode at this point, at least in the United States, is known as kinship care, where kids who have been abused are placed with the relatives of the abuser. Right? That's like 40% at this point of kids in foster care are placed with kinship care. And those kids aren't resisting, and ignoring and wiping out that entire family. Right? So it's two totally different clinical pictures between a child who's really been abused and a child who's been manipulated to reject one parent by the other parent. I want to talk for a little bit about some of the criticisms of the concept of PAS, and I feel obligated to do this because I don't want to give a talk and then people go back to their computers and they Google PAS and they find out that Richard Gardner was a pedophile devil, and without Amy Baker, boy, she doesn't know anything. So I'm going to try to take the devil by the horns, or whatever that phrase is, and do some of this. Okay, so the first one is, well, PAS isn't a valid syndrome because it's not in the DSM. The DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of the American Psychiatric Association. Clearly, if the APA doesn't think it exists, it's junk science and it couldn't possibly be real. All right, so why is that not a valid criticism? Because it sounds good, right? If you didn't know anything about the DSM and how it's made, you'd think, yeah, that PAS doesn't exist. Okay, so I want to tell you a little bit about how the DSM is created. First of all, it is revised about every 15 years. Unlike, say, the American Heart Association's guidelines for treatment, which is updated like every time there's a breakthrough, this is created every 15 or 20 years. So there's a huge gap in the updating it. It does not necessarily represent the current wisdom. The last time it was updated was, I think, 97. All right, so this is a quote from Alan Francis. He became the chair of the revision for version 4, which is right now the current version. He was critiquing the chair, Bob Spitzer, who undertook the revision from 2 to 3. So Alan Francis is describing, how did a new diagnosis get in from 2 to 3? How did Bob